Tolle's words, every human being has been conditioned to think and behave in certain ways. Conditioned genetically. Sometimes we are born with the behavior patterns of our parents or ancestors, right? As well as by their childhood experiences and their cultural environment. That is not who they are, that is who they appear to be. So beautiful. The dog barking is not the truth of the dog, it's just a conditioned pattern. Behind that, everyone is God, right? Everyone is the mother. That is not who they are, but that is who they appear to be. When you pronounce judgment upon someone, you confuse those conditioned mind patterns with who they are. To do that is in itself a deeply conditioned and unconscious pattern. You give them a conceptual identity, and that false identity becomes a prison, not only for the other person but also for yourself. So beautiful and so true. So if I have made an identity of a person, I have an already always about that person. When I go up to that person, I'm expecting the person is already like that and always like that. And that already always I hold about the person becomes a prison for me also. No, I can't be free around that person. I'm always on my guard. I'm always expecting that behavior. And because I'm expecting that behavior, I'll draw it out also from that person. But if I see that human imperfection and I just say that's not who the person really is, that's just the conditioning of the person playing out. Behind that, that person, like every other person, is just the same God essence, right? So to remember that all the time, then you don't take the behavior of that person very seriously. Not seriously enough to make it personal, to get offended, to start hating on that person, disliking the person. To let go of judgment does not mean that you don't see what they do. It means that you recognize their behavior as a form of conditioning, and you see it and accept it as that. You don't construct an identity out of it for that person. You don't say that's a mean person, that's a selfish person, that's a this person, that's a that person. It's just a conditioned thought pattern. That liberates you as well as the other person from identification with conditioning, with form, with mind. The ego then no longer runs your relationships. See, so I'll try and share a little bit of what we did in the yoga class this morning, because I really believe what Mother says, that you can live a truth only when you live it with the body, isn't it? So whenever a person rubs you off the wrong way, you resist that behavior, right? You make it personal. When you resist that behavior, you harden, right? Wherever you harden, the ego gets very strong, because the only thing in you that can ever hurt is the ego. Nothing else in you can hurt. Only your ego can hurt, right? What you are beyond the ego, it can't be hurt. So whatever is hurt, wherever the ego is very strong, there's a need to assert. There's a need to see what is ego. In simple terms, it's the need to be noticed. It's the need to be acknowledged. It's the need to be seen, right? Now, when you're stretching in an asana, wherever there's pain, that muscle will tighten. Obviously it will, or it will stretch. When it stretches, the muscle will push against the skin, push forward against the skin, right? See, even if you're not part of a yoga class, you can do a simple stretch and experience it. the muscle will push against the skin. Now, in a way, that's the physical ego. Whatever is hurt wants to push itself forward, wants to be acknowledged, wants to prove it's right. Now, at that time, if you learn to move the muscle away from the skin, not forward push. Ego is what wants to push forward. Whenever you soften and the ego withdraws, the self comes forward, the real self. And whenever the ego comes forward, the self withdraws. So in a simple asana practice, if you learn to soften a muscle behind the skin, it's withdrawing the physical ego of that part. And then the same asana is not hurting you anymore. The same thing is not painful anymore. So if you can do it with your body, as Mother says, a truth can only be lived when you live it with your body. So if you learn to soften the muscle away, similarly then in life you'll be able to do that. When you're hurt, the ego wants to come forward and hit out, and at some level maybe that's necessary. When you're younger, you need to individualize, but as Sri Aurobindo says, ego was the helper, ego is the bar. At some point you need to act from a space beyond the ego, and that's why when you get triggered, if you just soften instead of pushing forward and fighting, if you soften behind it, if you let go of resistance. How will you let go of resistance? By all this that we've discussed, that it's just a conditioned thought pattern, there's nothing personal there. It's an empty boat hitting against me. To yell at it is to yell at the empty boat. It's quite pointless. And then after softening, when you're quiet, when you're gathered, then if you need to take the right action, you'll take it. For example, I want to meditate. I don't want to be a doormat where the boat keeps hitting against my boat. But instead of yelling at somebody, I'll just do something to push the boat away from me and put an anchor down. So it doesn't mean you don't take action, but usually when you're angry and you hit out, you don't take the right action. So when you're individualizing, when you're coming into your own, it's nice to find your voice. But remember, that's the voice of the ego. There's another voice, a higher voice that needs to be found, which you'll find when you transcend the voice of the ego.